Current good manufacturing practices, observations, decisions, and actions. What is good in the observations we make, in the decisions we make, and in the actions we take? Let's explore pharmaceutical competence, complexity, and culture in this context. Professional development is a key aspect to quality assurance. A profiteer who learns to be patient develops to become a professional was a general theme we introduced previously. Profiteer, patient, professional, good practitioners, in a sense, are stages of our development, and each of those stages is embedded within us. We are here to explore the dynamic interactions of cultural demands and emerging mental capabilities in the context of pharmaceutical manufacturing and quality control and assurance. What we mean by maturity in people's thinking is not a matter of how smart they are, but it is a matter of the order of consciousness in which they exercise their smartness or lack of it. Professor Robert Keegan, in his book In Over Our Head. Making good decisions in systems is a key consideration we want to explore. So here is an illustration of making good decisions in the Hollywood system. What does development and maturity mean in this context? Here is a cartoon of a movie critic. His friend brings a Blu-ray movie so that they can watch together. I got this great Blu-ray movie to watch. And the critic says, oh no, not this one. It sucks. But you gave it your highest rating. I'm a movie critic. It is my job. I was at work when I rated it, and watching it was hard work. Right now, I'm not at work. I want to be entertained. Let's find one that I rated poorly. Clearly, movie rating should be related to quality of the movie. And we assume quality of movies is normally distributed. Few movies are outstanding, few are terrible, most are average. Is that true? I have no idea. But let's look at the movie rating system, which is the courtesy the Film Rating Corporation provides to the audience to empower families to make informed movie choices. Now, I'm going to play with the words informed movie choices in a very different sense. So pay attention. What I suggest is we want to be empowered to question informed choices and make rational decisions. Did you get that? Informed choices, the words are choices which have been informed already, formed in our mind. And how did they get formed? Oh, we were influenced by propaganda. We were influenced by this movie critic who wanted to sell his the thing to the paper. So, informed choices, we often don't think about it, but what those words are saying is the choices in our mind have been formed already by external influences which we did not pay attention to. So, questioning informed choices and making rational decisions is what we want to explore in this discussion. So, in the context of pharmaceutical manufacturing, input, output, and in between input and output is processing. And the notion of garbage in, garbage out, I think is apt to remind ourselves. So the challenge is informed choices are not verified and we don't pay attention to feedback. In this larger or bigger picture, we can say input is care and power, wisdom is practice, and outcome is satisfaction. And satisfaction is when the feedback is satisfactory. And the feedback mechanisms in pharmaceutical sector are broken, incomplete, or not very efficient because the quality of a product is confounded in its clinical safety and efficacy. And patients and providers often do not have the ability to judge quality. And that's the reason we have the regulatory system in part. So, in that sense, the feedback is the broken pipe that you see below. We have many observers, many opportunities to observe, many opportunities to measure, analyze materials, as well as make observations of people and of writing of on documents. So we have R&D, regulatory affairs and management, regulatory review, pre-application, pre-approval inspection by FDA, and that leads to technology transfer, validation, and then we begin commercial manufacturing. We have quality control of incoming raw materials. We do the processing. We have in-process measurements, and we have in-process observations. We have a final check, quality control 2. We have a review of all the documentation. That's what we call compliance, and that's done by quality assurance. And then we occasionally, every 2 years, are supposed to have a CGMP routine inspection by FDA, and they make observations. And then also we have patients, providers, and public health, public assessing our products and giving feedback when they feel like or when there are issues and so forth. So that pipeline is full of information or can be full of information, and the feedback is often neglected. Now, the feedback here, the arrows are showing one way. There is no feedback arrow. How would you draw the feedback arrows? And I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, I think every cylinder piece that you see here can be interconnected to every observer, every decision maker as a network. And so this is something we need to think about. So as we think about systems, I want to introduce the concept of chaotic system, complex systems, complicated systems, and simple systems. We won't define it in this presentation, but I just want to seed that thought, and we'll pick that up in the next presentation. Practice without feedback is addiction. Bad habits are difficult to break, even those that are certain to kill us. And that is the stark reality of human nature that we see every day, and we believe we are not impacted by it. It's somebody else's problem. It's not. We are on an exponential curve of mortality due to addiction. If you don't understand how serious that is, please consider what an exponential curve does. Mind matters, and much of our professional education training is to delegitimize mind in one sense, is to put it aside. We are materialistic. Our science is only materialistic, and that is a source of a challenge that we have to confront, and we have no choices left but to confront that. Maturity is of our mind. Mind is as real as matter. I have put in parentheses is and question mark for a title of a paper appearing in Nature Reviews Neuroscience 2005. When words are painful, unraveling the mechanisms of nocebo effect, nocebo hyperglacia, how anxiety is turned into pain, getting the pain you expect, mechanisms of placebo, nocebo, the pharmacodynamics of placebo, expectation effects of price as proxy. We talk about those response relationships. I can refer you to publications in Science 2017 that actually does a price response relationship. I can refer you to this paper in Neurology where you have price response relationships. Forget the dose, there was no drug in any of those products. With placebos, you have price response relationships. Interactions between brain and spinal cord value effects in nocebo hyperglycia is the paper that was published in Science in 2017. Mind is as real as matter. Seeking sameness of equivalence in inequality is our challenge, and we have to recognize this as a challenge. We have to describe it as a challenge. Experiencing automatic substitution in experience economy is painful. Now, the pushback to that assertion would be, well, we are bioequivalent. If you want to really be truthful, read the definition of therapeutic equivalence. It is by definition an expectation. It's an expectation of what the professionals at FDA and who decide it is equivalence is. An expectation is an expectation. It is not truth. It can be, but it may not be. And that's the gap we have to consider. Now, in the inequality that we see today, 20 to 30% of the population are losing trust in generic drugs. Yes, 70% of the population trusts a generic drug. But for me, the example of vaccines is a stark reminder, a canary in my coal mine, that the percentage of people who have stopped trusting vaccines has increased so dramatically. I don't want to see that happen with our generic drug sector. Generics for me, but brand for you has been a theme ever since the generic drug scandal. And we have never ever regained the trust of the trust we lost due to that scandal. And more recently, after the Ranbaxy debacle and the breaches in assurance of data integrity, warning letter, and import alert, we started seeing evidence such as this: burden of changes in pill appearance of for patients receiving generic cardiovascular medications after myocardial infarction. The adherence rate started falling 30% to 60% depending on populations. And we have defined pharmaceutical equivalence literally as a tablet and a capsule. It could be different mechanism, different color, different all sort of things, because we wanted to expand the use of generic drugs. And FDA had to respond with a guidance in 2015 that size and shape matters. Color is an important consideration, but color can also be a trademark. So if you use color as a basis to impose, remind, or constrain generics, we won't have a generic system. So the question really is, I think, do we really understand the FDA system? Here is a question that Dr. Woodcock answered. Do you really understand FDA's inspection? And she said, to my knowledge, there is no detailed common understanding within the United States about GMP compliance, what compliance means. That's the center director. And she says, in fact, the effectiveness of our inspection program is unknown even to me. So this is the challenge we are confronting. We have decision systems. So her decision, I placed it at level 5. It's a different level than a decision system that would be in a division or a group within FDA making decisions on what sites to inspect, when to inspect, and so forth. Those are the decisions. And then there is a decision system which is at a higher organization level after you have received the observations noted by the investigators at the site. Whether to give a warning letter or not is a decision criteria. And then you have actions, regulatory actions, such as import alerts, non-compliance warning letters, and so forth. So how rational and how useful and how effective are these decision making, I think, is an important consideration. But I want to remind you that given the example we saw that patients need assurance in the quality and they can't judge quality. So in the experience economy, warning letters, import alerts, consent decree, and the negative social and media coverage takes away the assurance we have. So we have to have the right balance here. And Dr. Deming reminded us, you toast, I will scrape is what happens when we rely on inspection. The Center for Drugs, Dr. Woodcock, has created a vision for the future that manufacturing becomes more efficient without needing extensive FDA oversight. That's the real aspect of the reason for quality by design. That's the reason for suitability and capability and statistical process control, that the ICHQ8 guideline, FDA's process validation guideline, and a risk-based decision-making process Q9, and a systems approach to quality management was all about. The challenge we have is much of the sector is grappling with skewed perceptions of GMP. This is a picture from Express Pharma. I have been writing for Express Pharma since 2013 on the very topics I'm talking to you about. And I also wrote a blog, is the pharmaceutical quality elephant in the dark, or is it six blindfolded men? And that's the reason for this cover page of this publication, which they have kindly given me permission to use. So we can choose to keep our blindfolds, or we can agree to see an elephant in the dark. Elephant in the Dark is the title of a poem by Rumi many centuries ago. And his strategy is, if we only hold our candles in the dark, we can see the whole elephant. I mean, that's as simple as that. The poem of Elephant in the Dark is a poem which originates in India, and it became popular in the West, and the title became Six Blind Men and the Elephant. That was never the story. It was the yearning of learning and understanding, which was the original intent of the story, which was captured by Rumi, but not. I think it got lost in translation in the Western poem Six Blind Men and the Elephant. The challenge we have is, a bad system will beat a good person every time. That's a quote from Dr. Deming. So where do we go from here? I think clearly the Pied Piper we don't follow. Clearly we look at our evolution. Clearly automation, continuous manufacturing, artificial intelligence is a solution coming about. But at the same time, I think we have to remember, technology is not the problem, and it's not necessarily the solution. The solution is us, and the problem is us. So we have to be the change, and we have to be the cause. And here is where I wanted to sort of bring together a way of understanding professional development in the context of good decision making. So what I want to share here with this picture is, let's remember checks and balances. So you have our checks and you have our balance, which is a courtroom code balance, which I could have shown you a balance, but I think the quote reminds you of the balance. The key here is, we have to have multiple systems. For example, in the US, the policymakers are the representatives and senators, and the executive branch is where FDA is, and then you have the judicial branch where the Supreme Court is. So rational decision making in a society, in a culture, is just, you need different parts to challenge, to check, to have the checks and balances for rational decisions to occur. Similarly, I think we have a semblance of that in a independent quality unit, but how independent that is, it remains a question. Now, orders of consciousness in which we exercise our smartness is something we want to think about, and we want to sort of describe different orders of consciousness, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then Professor Keegan has not defined X, but I think there are other orders of consciousness. But the key there is the whole mind thinking. Heart and brain have to come together to understand systems and to know that care is research, knowledge is power, and wisdom is in practice. So a simple model, intrapersonal model for good in the context of CGMP is what I have created this as a Russian doll model, a nested Russian doll model with different stages of professional development in the context of CGMP. Within us, we have the procrusteus, the one who is so selfish that will chop off body parts literally or figuratively or and so forth. We grow up, we just want to be looking good, peer pressure and others. So we do things just to look good. And then we mature and we just want to be good, not question the system, just follow the rules. And then we develop further where we internalize what the meaning of quality and what the meaning of our responsibility and why are we here to do what we do. And that's when systems orientation, system thinking begins. You don't have systems orientation at lower orders of consciousness. And and then we grow up to see good in difficult situations and paradoxes, and we are able to manage to see good in paradoxical situations. The official translation of orders of consciousness per Dr. Professor Keegan is impulse control, imperialist, socialized mind, self-authored, and self-transforming. So the fourth order of consciousness is self-authored mind, and that's when systems orientation begins. Self-transforming mind is ideal for the challenges we see in the experience economy, according to Professor Keegan, but a very small fraction of the human population reaches that. In the US, the estimated percentage is about 1%. So that clearly is not the solution. We have to bring ourselves at least to the self-authored mind and build systems around us that will allow us to be systems oriented, to be focused on patient-centric drug development and so forth. But remember this, all models are wrong, some are useful. Box, I think that's a useful concept to there are several different dimensions of Professor Keegan's orders of consciousness: within, intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cognitive. I have only focused with my nested doll model on intrapersonal. I'm assuming the cognitive aspect, your intellectual, your education and training is at par of where for the discussion, and so I'm not getting in there. So to illustrate the application of this within the context of pharmaceutical manufacturing and sort of extend this to development stages of pharmaceutical quality units or pharmaceutical corporations, I had written a paper on how to break the pharmaceutical to the sigma barrier like Amgen, and you have a link to that that you can see. But at the same time, I think I'm using phrases from Amgen and Pfizer. Pfizer at the 2001 FDA Science Board meeting declared at the FDA Science Board that they have adopted a policy of don't use or don't tell when it comes to new technologies, especially that was the launch of Pharmaceutical Technology Initiative. And Amgen in 2005, and I'll show you some more information on that, said if I don't look, there is no problem, was the mindset within Amgen. So they were not improving because of a immunity to change, which Professor Keegan describes into three parts. There's a change prevention system, there's a feeling system, and there is a knowing system. Change prevention system it can be many things. It even includes the regulatory change control processes and requirements like prior approval supplements. And the feeling system is something in professional development and in education training we do not consider. What are the feeling systems? Why do we feel the way we feel is an important consideration. And clearly, the knowing system, how to solve problems in a system where the root cause may be in different part of the system, like and becomes a challenge. So the stages of development can be third order socialized mind. If I don't look, there's no problem. To problem solving, fourth order, and to fifth order prevention of errors. So, in that sense, I think the mindset, leadership, regulatory context, just to give you a sense, cognitive, intrapersonal, interpersonal dimensions of fourth order, self authored, effective leaders. Yes, FDA approved, but we are responsible for quality, problem solving, systems orientation. Did I achieve my goals? Follow a process or methodology to do things, not do ad hoc. Compared that to the third order socialized mind, leaders are ineffective, FDA approved, so all okay. Know and follow the rules, but and seek support. Are we okay? They're only concerned with are we okay? Mend relationships. And the fifth order of consciousness is exceptional leaders. Our quality standards better than the minimal requirements. Explore options, prevention of problems, system of systems. Did I achieve a valued outcome? Value and learn from conflict. And I'll use the example of Sandoz biosimilar development and how we tried to achieve this with the initial Sandoz biosimilar development program in a separate talk. So quickly on the Amgen story, the little secret. The little secret is a phrase that was the front page of the Wall Street Journal on 3rd of September 2003, which says the pharmaceutical industry has a little secret. Even as it invents futuristic new drugs, its manufacturing techniques lag behind those of potato chip and laundry detergent soap makers. There's a whole story behind that, which I won't get into, but I'm using slides from Amgen's, from Martin's, who was the chief quality officer. But he says, what keeps us from changing? Victims of our own success. Products have strong patent protection. We are isolated from economic cycles. Regulatory systems promoted and encouraged to inspect and test quality into the system, and that was a key. And Amgen's journey to Six Sigma, not the methodology, but to 3.4 defects per million opportunities in every aspect of the manufacturing process, every aspect of critical quality attribute is an amazing journey, which I think I have summarized, and we can also gather from internet the slide decks that I have used here, which Martin has shared publicly. The journey begins with questioning informed choices. Why are investigations important? Because stuff happens. We are here to serve patients. Was the turning point within Amgen. And then Amgen took on a continuous improvement journey by first instituting a risk-based classification system to have immediate response from management on any aspect that was non-conformance, improved trending of non-conformance, improved management review, developed network metrics, control plans, and then standardized root cause analysis, developed technical writing course for investigators, improved quality sign or involved quality science in investigations, and initiated investigator mentoring, qualification, and certification program. I believe this is just a hint of what is necessary to overcome. If I don't look, there's no problem. But remember this: we are discussing an organization. An organization is a group of people, and group of people are at different stages of the development. Amgen would have to have had a small group of fifth order of consciousness at the senior management level to initiate this initiative, get program, and then bring the rest of the organization up to from the third order of consciousness to the fourth order of consciousness. That's the key here. So the output of this is professional satisfaction, not only in terms of, I think, the power of error reduction, but the savings can be hundreds of millions of dollars. So if I don't look, here is no problem. Problem solving, prevention of errors are stages of development at individual and corporate levels. So let me share a few examples that will be useful for you to think about our understanding of matching orders of consciousness with complexity of decisions. Are we in over our heads or not? So I will use one example, but I will provide you my slides that I used at a USP conference in Mumbai in 2015, which describes the other two and many other case examples. So let's look at a case example, a simple case example of an analyst in a QC lab, which FDA inspector found to do testing into compliance. There is another example that I think will be useful for you to review. It's a real example of a FDA inspection in which FDA is inspecting a API manufacturing facility, and FDA investigators. I know him personally, so I have this. I was not involved with that, but I have first-hand information through the investigator himself. So the issue there was returned goods from farms which the facility had supplied this API to. The API is albuterol sulfate, used for inhalation, and the return goods were investigated and found to have a process-related impurity, which was at that time not part of the USP. So when the FDA inspector asked, why are you still manufacturing without taking the impurity out for human use? And the answer came back was, why should we? We are conforming to the USP. But here is the dilemma. They understood, they had the technical know-how, they had the right education and training to do the investigation to find out why the animals were having blisters, and they've identified the impurity. But since it was not in the USP, they did not feel they had to remove it. And how can that be? And then another major example, I think, is when dissolution failures became a national security issue, which I was involved directly, where US Marines were coming down with malaria when they were supposed to be protected by mefloquine tablets given as prophylaxis. The question had become, this was a national congressional level type of decision making. So that example is described in my other presentation, but I want you to sort of think about those cases in the context of this case example that I want to discuss in more detail. So testing into compliance, finding a sample that will meet specifications, not recording test results that did not meet specification. That's what testing into compliance is. Not good. So I think a simpler way of looking at that is, how do we cheat when we play golf? Here is a guy who is trying to get his ball into the putt by blowing air on it. So that's what's happening here. Clearly not good, of course. But is it better than trial injections, or using hidden labs, or simply making test solutions to inject in HPLC? Why did I ask this question? Because I actually interviewed this person that this case is based on. So I asked him, say, don't you know this is bad? He said, yes, but everybody is doing it. But I said, then he says to me, sir, look, the product is FDA approved, process has been validated, and the senior VP of quality has told us, if there is an error, you made the mistakes. I don't want to look bad. I did extra work, sir, he says. I did the test 3-4 times to find the sample that passed. I could have made the solution up. I could have simply put the number up. So I did extra work, sir. So he had that way of thinking. So how do you place that? So let's imagine ourselves in the shoes of the analyst, his or her supervisor, their VP, and their CEO, and use the simplified nested doll model to say, what is our order of consciousness? And then ask our question, what is common cause? What can be a common cause strategy to prevent such violations? So here is one way of thinking about this on the framing of decision and psychology of choice. So you have a QC analyst. There is no question about his competence in the context of his education and training. He has a master of pharmacy. He's experienced in QC for 1 year. He has undergone successfully the SOP training. And then in this particular case, it was a modified release tablet, and then the solution failed. Then you have it out of specification results, so you start there. His supervisor, per SOP, he files a deviation report. So his supervisor also has a master's of pharmacy. He's experienced in QC for 10 years. He has SOP training. Their head of analytics is more of a research guy. He's a PhD experienced one, but he's not looking out of the day to day. It goes straight to the head of operations. So the head of operations is a bachelor's degree in pharmacy and an MBA with 20 years of experience. He calls the analyst, and here is what he says: complete the investigation quickly and release the batch on time. And as I have talked to this head of operations also, what he did not say to them was what he told me. On several previous occasions, after a lengthy investigations, it turned out to be analyst error. The product is FDA approved and the process is validated. QC lab is not well managed. So now the QC folks are worried. When the CEO of the company will learn about this, it will not look good for me, and the analytical department is the head of analytics. He says, we are looking bad. Take all the resources, get the thing done right. And that is a source of bad eye. But here is a paper which contributed to the Nobel Prize Daniel Kahneman won in 2002. The Framing of Decisions and Psychology of Choice. The psychological principles that govern the perception of decision problems and the evaluation of probabilities and outcomes produce predictable shifts of preference when the same problem is framed in different ways. So, framing the problem, we are looking bad, changes the dynamics. And I'll share with you the paper I have written on connecting the dots on pharmaceutical quality culture. So systems thinking begins at fourth order of consciousness. What is the common cause? What is the common cause strategy? Clearly, we want to have assurance. Clearly, we want to have availability of pharmaceuticals. Clearly, we want to make sure pharmaceutical qualities are affordable, encourage generic competition. But there is a common cause here, and the common cause is, although we have recognized education, training, and experience in our regulations dating back to 1977, we have never updated, we have never defined what is suitable and what is capable professional development. So that is our common cause. So how do we address a common cause with a common cause strategy? Clearly, we want to improve awareness. Our inspectors, our supervisors have to be asking the right questions. Framing of the question is key. And we have to seek solutions at the appropriate levels and systems. Simply beating up on the analyst is not the solution. Defining expectations and tracking development, I think at a societal level of professional development and quality assurance, I think is a topic I'll talk to you about in a separate topic, but we have to think about taking decisions at the appropriate level. Improving awareness. It is difficult for industry and regulators to do so. Academia is a natural third leg of the stool. And I think in the US, with the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Technology and Education, with schools like Purdue, we are trying to do that. But this needs to occur all over. I think in a maturity model from software industry, I just modified that. When you have a process that has to be managed, it is characterized but reactive, has high perceived risk of cheating by design. Here's where trial injections. Here's where we get to testing into compliance, and that's the second order of consciousness. This is management-based regulations. File first, figure it out later. Multiple review cycles, warning letters, and import alerts are the outcomes here. We can do better. It's defined, characterized, and proactive. Minimal acceptable assurance. Stop and correct. Batch rejection occurs. Here, we are still dependent on FDA guidance. We are not independent. Measured and controlled, science-based and risk-based. This is where quality by design, higher assurance of quality, real-time control, state of control with statistical process control. And you can only improve a process when it is in a state of control. You cannot improve a process that is not in a state of control. For that, you need corrective and preventive actions. Corrective and preventive actions is not continual improvement. Please remember that. So solutions at appropriate levels and systems, I think, is the key. Here is a slide that I prepared from my talk on 19th October 2004 at the Advisory Committee for Pharmaceutical Science, is to connect the dots between ICHQ 8, 9, 10, and the process validation, and particularly in drug substance and drug formulation is the illustration. I think, for example, section P2.1.1 of drug substance reminds us key physicochemical and biological characteristics of drug substance that can influence the performance of the drug product and its manufacturability should be identified and discussed. I think the P2 section, the critical drug substance variable that need to be considered in the section 2.2.1 of formulation development is described in this particular one. So connecting the dots between drug substance, drug product development, manufacturing is a key, and that's really the mathematical way of looking at considering design space. But the important point here is this: individual and group level cognitive biases and knowledge illusions exist, and we have to bring awareness to that. Management push is based on FDA approved and validated, and often becomes a reason for rationalization, not to look bad or everybody else is doing it. Root cause of many out of specification issues are often built in R&D and CMC review in how we set specifications and how we establish acceptability of analytical methods. Suitability and capability of analytical methods over the life cycle is important, particularly for attributes that are physical attributes such as dissolution, particle size, cascade impactor, and so forth, because our analytical validation criteria focuses primarily on the basis of a model which is based on a solution. When it comes to solid material attributes, each material attribute is a unique sample. We don't have a stock solution to make a standard curve, and here extra care is needed. And beyond calibration, like we do for dissolution calibrator, we have to have a gauge RNR study, which most companies do not utilize because they think it's an added expense. But at the same time, we have to remember that by definition, the compendial monograph, the specifications are set to be acceptance criteria. They're never designed for QC testing, but we use them for QC testing. And the built-in type 1, type 2 errors are 5% consumer risk and 20% producer risk. The 20% producer risk has built-in failures, and we don't recognize that. And we go in circles after circles of doing root cause investigation and come back root cause unknown. And since FDA doesn't like root cause unknown answer, we blame the poor analyst, and the cycle continues. And the business model is file first, figure it out later, underestimating complexity and importance of research and development for generic drugs. We assume we have the prior knowledge to do that, but our material attributes, our excipients, functionality, and all, there are big uncertainties that are not adequately accounted for. So let me summarize. We don't verify informed choices, and we don't pay attention to feedback. We considered in this discussion selected dynamic interactions of cultural demands on pharmaceutical professionals in the context of observable emerging mental capabilities using a simple to use mental good model. Reasons why systems orientations and thinking can and should be considered as a stage of professional development was outlined. Clearly, we want to be finding ways to facilitate self-authorship at every level of the organization. Self-authorship is where we achieve fourth order of consciousness, and it is a means of improving systems orientation. Self-authorship at every level would mean that an operator who is working with an SOP, instead of just being trained to memorize that SOP, actually has a way to write the SOP. We train and let him develop to be able to take ownership of the SOP he's going to follow, to write it and improve it, And clearly, I think that's what professional development at the level of operator would be. At the level of CEO, it would be let them write the policies and procedures in a way that they can expect manifestation of their vision and mission in those documents. Not have a consultant write your quality policy or your procedures and so forth. That's really what I mean by professional development at our level. Building on this discussion, we will consider ways to describe culture of quality and personalize know-how of process validation and quality systems such that our efforts to improve suitability and capability of our manufacturing process also improves our system and simultaneously helps us develop ourselves. That's the topic we will cover next. Thank you for listening.